Helldivers 2 is one of the biggest games this year, but that still doesn't mean it's the best performing game. I've covered the game on various cloud platforms with various results. But one big complaint I've been getting, especially with platforms like Boosteroid, is that basically high enemies kill performance. To the point that they say that they wish they could get real reviews that take time to properly represent what you're selling. Well dude, you got your wish. Let's see how well Helldivers 2 performs on even more cloud platforms. What people need to understand about this game is that this game is mostly a CPU-bound game. Of course there's a graphical element to it, but in reality, you really don't need a 4090 to hit ultra settings at 4K, as you'll see. Now you do need a very good CPU for this game. Why? The more enemies you have, the more CPU power you need to process things in-game, just as seen here. But even then, the game isn't optimized enough to handle the amount of enemies. Let me show you. Now as you might know, we started with the Shadow Boost tier, which sports a Quadro P5000. This is equivalent to a GTX 1080. And as expected, even with low settings and a medium number of enemies, we have pretty bad performance. We get pretty much the same performance on the Air GPU RTX 4000 tier, which is equivalent to an RTX 2070 with 8 CPU cores. And again, this is to be expected. Now bumping it up to an RTX 3070 equivalent with the Shadow power upgrade does help things out, especially with the graphics. But it doesn't help out with the massive waves of enemies or just even in a huge open setting, even at 1080p. Granted, the Shadow power upgrade does have a CPU bottleneck, but again, this doesn't really matter. Now this is probably one of the most balanced configurations out of this whole lineup. The Air GPU A10G, which is equivalent to an RTX 3080 at 16 cores and 64 gigs of RAM. And yes, this tier is very expensive because it's running on AWS, but you do get what you pay for. At 1080p, at ultra settings, I usually hover around 50 to 70 FPS in light to modest numbers of enemies. But even in some of the most dense areas, I get an FPS in the mid-30s. But even then, I highly suggest this configuration, if you can afford it. Can this get any higher? Now check this out. I created a custom cloud PC on TensorDock, A6000, which is equivalent to an RTX 3090, 24 virtual CPUs, and 32 gigs of RAM. Initially, the game runs great at high to ultra settings at 4K. But even this machine got my frame rate down to the teens when things got hectic. Resolution didn't matter. So finally, I tried a machine as close to the GeForce Now Ultimate tier as possible, at a secret location. An RTX 4090, 16 third generation AMD EPYC processors with 32 gigs of RAM. Now just like the last tier, this tier does great on 4K at ultra settings with a normal amount of enemies. But even a machine of this magnitude can't handle this many units, even at 1080p. And the graphics settings set to the lowest settings. My frame rate hit the mid-20s. An RTX 4090 caliber machine. That's right. Now for those complaining, this is mostly a game issue. Sure, hate on Boosteroid, but in reality, this really isn't Boosteroid's fault. Could Boosteroid perform better? Yes. It was struggling with a normal amount of enemies, but it was playable. The game really isn't optimized too well when a high number of enemies are present, even for the best cloud PCs on the market. It is what it is, guys. Democracy requires sacrifice. Expect similar performance when Boosteroid's 4K Ultra tier is released. And if you're looking to sign up for any of these cloud PCs, I'll put the sign up links for all of them in the description. I'll also put the raw footage of this 4090 gameplay on my personal channel so you can get a better look. Now if you like this overview of Helldivers 2 on various cloud PCs, give us a like. Also make sure to join as a member of the channel or join our Patreon and our Discord in the links below. And above all else, make sure to subscribe to keep it locked right here at the only place where you can do battle in gaming heaven, Cloud Gaming Battle.